In this video, I'll cover 3 more story arcs in the Apocalypse Triptych edited by John Joseph Adams. The Apocalypse Triptych is a set of anthologies starting with The End is Nigh and continuing with The End is Now and The End is Come. The theme are life before, during, and after the apocalypse, respectively. Will McIntosh wrote the first story arc I'll cover in this video, and I'm calling it the Land of Nod story arc. It starts with a story called Dancing with Death in the Land of Nod. The story stars a 40-something named Johnny who is living about an hour from Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. His father has Alzheimer's disease encroaching, but he's still mostly there. Johnny helps out at the drive-in movie theater that his dad owns. There's a sickness that starts with uncontrollable nodding, and it ends with victims being completely paralyzed but still aware of what's going on, and that's spreading across the country. It's reached Wilkes-Barre, and Johnny knows that it's just a matter of time before it gets to them in their town. The story covers some serious human questions through the lens of Johnny's reactions. If a super contagious virus starts spreading, who's going to help people and who's going to avoid contact? What if somebody begs for help? Does the government even stand a chance of slowing a virus down when 9 out of 10 people catch it? If most of the population is alive but completely incapable of caring for itself, is it better to kill people off or let them starve to death? What do you do in that situation? I liked this story a lot. The characters' actions reflected who they really were. Thinking deeply on this one would lead one to see a lot of darkness in the story, though. There's also a lot of light in the way Johnny helps his father with the drive-in. I'd rate this one an 8 out of 10. The second story in this arc is Dancing with Batgirl in the Land of Nod. The nodding plague has come to Los Angeles, and it's pushing people to their limits. The main character, Ray, is trying to figure out the best way to prepare for the eventual collapse of society. When his wife tells him she's been cheating on him, he retreats to a room with his Batgirl paraphernalia collection and decides to go see the real Batgirl. As Ray moves through the story, the reader gets a glimpse of the nodding plague's impact on a big city. The interesting thing about this collapse of society is that people aren't getting violent because they're afraid to touch each other. People are laying everywhere, in the streets, on the sidewalks, on lawns, in cars, and it's impossible to know if they're alive or dead unless walking up to them. Ray gets a glimpse of what stardom means and learns that it doesn't change how human someone is. Even stars are subject to the highs and lows of life, just like everyone else. Ray's feelings for his wife go through some of the 5 stages of grief, though they're not necessarily in the usual order either. I enjoyed this story and felt kind of bad for Ray through parts of it. Then there were other parts where it seemed like Ray was pretty lucky. I'd rate this one an 8 out of 10. The final story in this arc is called Dancing with the Stranger in the Land of Nod. A woman named Teal is driving her family through Colorado when the Mercedes that she took off the lot in Denver breaks down in 20-degree weather. So much for German engineering, I guess. Her husband and 2 children are victims of the nodding plague, so they can't move and she has to leave them to get help from the next town and come back with another car. Coincidentally, unluckily for her, a man named Gil comes along in an SUV soon after she sets out on foot. Gil's wife and daughter are with him, and they are also suffering from the nodding plague. Teal and Gil join forces to get to Gunnison, Colorado, and they try to set up life with other survivors that are there. Most places are almost ghost towns, but there are still people around. The plague has run its course at this point, and those that are still mobile know they'll survive. But that puts a burden on them to care for their loved ones. The central question in this story is, how far does that responsibility go if it prevents a person from moving on with their life? Especially if there is no chance of recovering from the illness. The relationship that develops between Teal and Gil tests the limits of that burden. I like this story just as much as the first 2 in this arc, and I'd rate it an 8 out of 10 also. The Land of Nod story arc is really interesting if you extrapolate from what Will McIntosh has given in these stories. It decimates the population while mostly leaving the infrastructure of society intact. There's no mention of looting or violence in the stories, and the usual panic of the population is quelled by how contagious the virus is, so people are very subdued about it. I'd rate the Nodding Plague arc an 8 out of 10 overall. The idea of a plague that's going to force billions of otherwise healthy people to either starve to death or be killed by their own family or friends is pretty terrifying if you think about it. The next story arc is by Megan Arkenberg, and I'm calling it the Supervolcano arc, but don't get too excited by the name. The first story is called Houses Without Air. The story takes place in Georgetown in the Washington, D.C. area, and a woman named Beth is working on an immersive simulation program, even though she isn't sure how many people will ever use it. The air is full of ash because the Yellowstone Supervolcano has erupted. This story was a tough read for me. The sentences didn't flow well from one to the next, and I didn't really get much of a sense of the main character or anyone else. A reference is made to there only being a little air left in the world, so the destruction is presumably coming from volcanic ash that's apparently expected to block the sun, killing all the plants and ending the oxygen supply, along with all air-breathing life on Earth. I didn't really like this story, and halfway through, I just wanted it to end. I'm rating this one a 3 out of 10. The next story is called Twilight of the Music Machines. This one is happening in Chicago, and it's about a woman named Frida who works with a guy she calls Cloud. He's some sort of DJ or party promoter or something, and he spends his time finding new places to have parties and possibly set up for what might end up being the last party on Earth. Just like the first story, the sentence flow felt really choppy to me, and I didn't really feel like I knew the characters at all. I'm not sure why everyone in this apocalypse acts like it's just an inconvenience. The air is filled with particles. The bigger problem is the rain that has turned acidic, and it's quickly corroding everything, including the skin it touches. I'm giving this one a 4 out of 10. It just wasn't for me and was only slightly better than the first one in the story arc. This arc's final story is called Like All Beautiful Places, and this time we're transported to San Francisco, but at first it's a San Francisco that has been built into the immersive virtual technology that Beth was working on in the first story, Houses Without Air. A tester named Gricia is experiencing the virtual San Francisco and mulling over memories of a past relationship. When she comes out of the virtual tour, she goes and looks at the real San Francisco. Sentence flow improved in this one compared to the first two stories. I didn't feel like there was all that much to this story, though. It was one of those navel-gazing stories that I don't like too much, though that did lead to a slightly deeper character, even if the story overall wasn't something I liked. I'm rating this one a 4 out of 10. You can probably see why I said naming this the Super Volcano arc shouldn't excite you too much. I'm only rating this one a 4 out of 10 overall. These stories were very dull to me, and halfway through the first one, I was dreading that all three would be similar, and unfortunately, they were. The next arc is by Scott Sigler, and it's the Alien Invasion arc. The leading story in this is called The Fifth Day of Deer Camp. George, three of his friends, and a teacher who was like a father to all of them have gone up to a remote cabin in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. They go there every November. They have guns, and the idea has always been an annual hunting trip where they tell stories, give each other crap, and pretend they'll eventually get around to hunting. It's 40 below outside when they hear what sounds like a jet engine roar by close over their heads a couple times, and then they have to investigate. I found this story really enjoyable. Scott Sigler does a great job using George's point of view to give each man a distinct personality and make them stand out in a few lines of description and dialogue. The cold can almost be felt as you read it. Of course, I was sitting in an ice rink when I was reading this, so that might have helped the atmosphere. All the characters act like they actually have brains in their heads too, so none of them go off half-cocked when the crap hits the fan. I'm rating this one an 8 out of 10 and thinking I might have to hunt down some more stuff by Scott Sigler. The next story in this arc is called The Sixth Day of Deer Camp. We're still with the men near the remote Upper Peninsula cabin. They've argued about leaving the cabin or staying put. It's 40 below outside with impassable roads, so they'd have to walk, and that seems out of the question for them. When they hear thudding and cracking outside, they have to go check out the source. This is a direct continuation of the previous story, and it's just as good. The men make somewhat intelligent decisions. George has a family that might need him and actually debates sneaking away from everyone to try to make it out on his own. When they're faced with alien weapons of war, they have to defend their position. After the battle, they make a discovery that changes everything. George's concern shifts from direct survival to just wanting to get back to his family in this story. He doesn't want to abandon his friends, though, so he's kind of in a tough spot. There's some action in this story and some suspense after the action. There's a lot of good stuff in this one. I'm rating it an 8 out of 10 and saying, hey, it's another good story in this story arc. The final story in this arc is The Seventh Day of Deer Camp. We're still with George, but it's been a year since the events of the first two stories. There are also some flashbacks to the period immediately following the sixth day of Deer Camp. I can't say a lot about this story without giving away too much of the plot, though, so I'm not going to say much. The reader does learn how the alien invasion started and ended in this story. George makes a decision during one of the flashbacks that changes his life and the lives of many people on Earth. There's some regret because he misses his own children and hasn't seen them since the alien invasion. However, the consequences of giving up on what he's doing are too severe in his own mind to choose his family instead. I'm rating this one a 9 out of 10. It has a moment in it that just kind of made me say, wow. I'd been wondering if any of the authors in the Apocalypse Triptych would actually use an alien invasion as the end of the world scenario, and I finally got it here, 12 story arcs in. Scott Sigler did a great job putting this arc together, and I think it's probably my favorite of the 12 story arcs that I've read so far. I'd rate this one a 9 out of 10 overall. It's entertaining and thoughtful and makes me wonder what I'd do in George's shoes. So that's another 3 story arcs down. If you want to see any of the other Apocalypse Triptych reviews, you can find them on my channel or check them out in the playlist. If you have any comments on these stories or similar stories, please leave them in the comments sections below. Bye for now.